Welcome to another broadcast of the Dr. Briar Lee Mitchell Show on the Artist First Radio Network. Dr. Briar Lee Mitchell is the author of Big Ass Shark, Walking on Mars, Dark Lights, and several more. Her books and bio can be found at briarmitchell.com. Dr. Mitchell is also a nationally certified search and rescue volunteer, helping law enforcement find missing people with her world-famous canine partner, Thor. And ladies and gentlemen, she came a picture. Here she is, your host, Dr. Briar Lee Mitchell.
Scott, thank you. And again, thank you for acknowledging that my dog is more important than I am. He appreciates that. I think one day we're going to have to just give him his own podcast. I'm very excited about the show tonight. I'm just absolutely delighted to have this guest with me tonight, Gene Baur. He has been hailed as the conscience of, modern, the conscience of the food movement by Time magazine, and founded the Farm Sanctuary, which is in upstate New York in Watkins Glen. And I'm so delighted to have you here. Gene, thank you for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's great to be with you.
I was just delighted at the poetic start to such an illustrious career that you started for yourself here, that you actually traveled the country in a VW van at Grateful Dead concerts.
That's right. That is how Farm Sanctuary started. We were an all-volunteer organization, and the way we raised funds was by selling veggie hot dogs at Grateful Dead shows out of our Volkswagen van. So I traveled all over the East Coast doing that. And we also used to use the van to do undercover investigations of farms, stockyards, and slaughterhouses. So that vehicle got a lot of use, and it really made a big impact and was where Farm Sanctuary started.
Do you still have that VW?
We sure do. It's out at our farm in California right now. But yes, we have the VW van. The last time I drove it was for our 25th anniversary, where we had our gala in New York City, in Manhattan, a black tie event. So the van was parked outside of it. And then from there, I left and drove cross-country, stopping at various places, at vegan restaurants and talking to different activists and celebrities and some legislators and business people, and then ended up ultimately coming into California to our hoedown at our farm in Orland, California. So it was a cross-country 25th anniversary tour, stopping by, and that's why the van is still out in California, because last time it was driven was during that cross-country trip.
Wow. And were you doing the driving?
I sure was, and I had had a crew with me. We were taking pictures and videotape and, speaking with people along the way. And we even went to the little row house in Wilmington, Delaware, where Farm Sanctuary started, because when we began, we didn't have farms. We didn't have really anything except the van, and somebody let us use this little row house in Wilmington, Delaware. So as part of the cross-country tour, we started out in New York City and then drove down to this little row house in Wilmington, Delaware, spoke with the people who own it now, which was kind of interesting, and then continued along our way, went into Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is where we were very active investigating Lancaster stockyards, where animals were routinely left for dead. And in fact, our first rescued animal, Hilda, is a sheep who had been left on a pile of dead animals at Lancaster stockyards. So we went by that location, and there's still a restaurant nearby called the Stockyard Inn that was operated in conjunction with the stockyard. And we had a vegan event at the Stockyard Inn, and they made it was really nice, and they made a 25th anniversary vegan birthday cake for Hilda, who was rescued. So it was really nice because historically we had been protesting in front of the Stockyard Inn, urging them not to serve veal, for example. And 25 years later, they were cooking up all kinds of great vegan food and celebrating Hilda's rescue. So it was really nice to see this sort of progress over time.
It is amazing to see this kind of progress. I was watching TV the other day. It's, of course, Shark Week, and I have to watch that.
Yeah.
And I saw a commercial for a product that it actually said vegan. I was amazed. I wish I'd had recorded it, because it was a commercial, first one I'd seen on a national broadcast that actually said vegan. I thought that was like monumental. It seems to be becoming part of the way the nation is going at this point. There are so many more people who are starting to embrace this lifestyle. I'm just curious, though, what your opinion is, or your thoughts are. Why do some people just react so violently to the term vegan, or to people who say they're vegan?
Yeah, well, I think that when a person learns that you are vegan, it sort of triggers many thoughts and feelings. And, we grow up in a society where it is normal to eat other animals without really thinking about it. And when somebody learns that you're a vegan, it kind of brings this reality into focus, and it sort of challenges people's daily habits. And even if the vegan isn't raising the issue, being vegan causes people to start thinking about it, I believe. And I think sometimes people are very uncomfortable, and they don't feel good about supporting this abusive factory farming industry. And at the same time, many times they often feel afraid to change or incapable of changing. So I think there's this discomfort with the dissonance between people's empathy and compassion and humanity and their behavior, which supports horrible factory farming cruelty. And then when they come to meet vegans, it sort of brings that into focus, and they feel upset. And sometimes will lash out at vegans as a result. But I think that, most people are humane, and one of Farm Sanctuary's ultimate goals is to urge people to live in alignment with their own compassionate values, because most people are humane and would rather not support cruelty. But most people today in the U.S. are unwittingly supporting cruelty by eating animal food. So if we can help people take steps towards eating plants instead of animals, it is ultimately empowering. People can feel good about where their food comes from. So when the issue of animal agriculture comes up, people don't have to fear it and say, oh, don't tell me, I don't want to know, it's too upsetting. They can know they're eating plants and not supporting this abusive industry. So I think vegans really, and when people come into contact with vegans, it just sort of draws attention to this dissonance between their own compassion, which is in conflict with their behavior, specifically their food choice.
I remember when I was a little kid going into the grocery store with my mom to shop, and she would buy the chicken and the beef and whatnot, and it was all packaged up. It just, didn't even look like an animal. And I never made the connection. And that, to me, was just so surprising when I finally realized what the heck it was, what I was eating. And it was a shock to me. And I was so amazed that I had been eating this stuff. And then we would go out to the country and play with the cows, and it was just such a startling moment when I realized that that's what this is. And I think that might be part of it. Most people just don't want to make that association that what they're putting on their plate was actually a living, breathing, feeling individual. And I think it's remarkable, though, that at this time in this country or in the world, that people are starting to recognize that these animals actually do have personalities and they do have feelings. Now, you founded the Farm Sanctuary, and you are an ambassador. You've been traveling literally the world trying to help people understand, not beating them over the head as I understand it. You're working to educate, I guess would be the best way to describe it. What is your goal for all of this?
Yeah, no, as you say, the goal is to educate people and ultimately to inspire and encourage and support people to live more compassionately and to live more in alignment with their own values and their own humanity. If we can live well without causing unnecessary harm, why wouldn't we? I think most people would want to do that. But, again, at the same time, we have these habits and patterns of behavior that have become familiar and comfortable, and so changing can be tough. So we realize that, and we just encourage people to take incremental steps if they're not ready to go vegan overnight. And, for example, participate in a Meatless Mondays program where one day a week they don't eat meat. And what that does is that as people start exploring what they can eat instead of meat, they start learning about all kinds of great plant foods that are out there. And oftentimes that leads them to eat more plant foods throughout the rest of the week. But just start doing small things, and small steps often lead to bigger steps, which lead to big positive changes over time. And so it's really about empowering people to live in alignment with their values, to live well, and also essentially to live in alignment with their interests. Eating food that makes us sick is irrational and illogical. But in the United States, it is common. It's been estimated that we could save 70% on healthcare costs in the U.S. by eating a whole foods plant-based diet. But instead, we're eating food that makes us sick. So that is not in our interest. And so I think if we frame this in terms of living in a way that is in alignment with our values and our interests, I think most people would agree with that. So you start from the common ground and you build from there.
I think incremental steps, that's really the best way to do it. There are so many, it's not just the way people live with their own families. There are whole events that go on with this. You know, the famous hot dogs with the baseball games up in New York and, the Bacon Festival in Texas, all these horrible things that go on. So there's a real mindset to people that this is something they can't change. What do you think, though, about people who come armed with the Bible? And there's a segment in the Bible at the beginning in Genesis that talks about God gave man the ability to subdue everything on the earth, dominion over all the fish, over all the fowl, and every single thing that lives and moves on the earth. How do you talk about that?
Well, I would say that parents have dominion over their children. That doesn't mean that they should treat them badly or exploit them. I think that, within Christianity and within various religions, there are different ways of interpreting the gospel or other writings. And at the end of the day, most religions have pretty much the same underpinning, which is the golden rule: do unto others. Do unto others as you wish to be done unto yourself, caring for the least of these, living in a way that is upstanding and compassionate. And all of that ultimately moves us towards eating plants instead of animals. But if you want to look at the Bible and look at Genesis, in the Garden of Eden, it was a vegetarian, if not a vegan place. And, and Adam and Eve were given every herb-bearing seed for their meat. So, and then humans started eating animals after the fall, and then things went on from there. I've spoken to religious scholars over the years, and what they have told me, and this was a Catholic priest I spoke to a number of years ago, and I asked him this: what is ideal? And he said, ideally, we would be vegans, but eating animal foods is not forbidden if it is necessary. So the question is it necessary? And in fact, it is not necessary, and it's even harmful the way we're doing it today, not only to animals, but to our own health and to the planet. Animal agriculture is one of the top contributors to the most serious environmental problems our planet faces. So this is an industry that is bad for ourselves, bad for animals, bad for the earth. And I think if you look back at the different religious teachings, there's a lot of conflicting information there. You can take, but at the core is this concept of compassion and kindness to others and treating the least of these with respect. And that all moves us towards eating plants instead of animals.
I love that analogy. I'd never thought about that, the Garden of Eden. I've seen so many artists' representations of it, and I don't see one cow or sheep in there. It's all plants. So I think that's just a wonderful image to it. I have to keep that one definitely stored away in the back of my mind there. It'll make me smile. I have also encountered people who will adamantly say to me, well, if we're not supposed to eat them, why did God make them taste so good?
Oh, wow. Well, spices. Spices can be put on vegetables just as easily as they can put on animal products. And this idea of meat tasting good, think about that for a second. If you see a dead body of an animal, are we going to quickly eat it? It's going to be rotting. It's not tasty at all. If human beings were natural carnivores and we saw an animal who was dead and their body was there, or if they were injured and bleeding, we would start salivating. But we don't do that, and we're also not inclined to go. There's a great quote in a book that says, if you take a child and put him in a room with a rabbit, and an apple. And if he eats the rabbit and plays with the apple, I'll buy you a new car. The kid is not inclined to go want to rip up and eat a bunny. The kid is more inclined to play with the bunny, which is, I think, a more natural, healthy human tendency. And the idea of going and ripping up another creature is a violent act that is not only bad for the animal, but it is bad for us. I've spoken to people, and I've been into slaughterhouses, and I've spoken to people that have worked at these places, and that does something to you, and it's not healthy. So supporting this industry as consumers, we're also causing people to conduct themselves in violent ways that are ultimately not good for people either.
It's such an important message that you have, and it's not just that it's a personal one for you. This is becoming a groundswell. This is something that so many people are starting to embrace for themselves. And you have some amazing answers to these, and it comes from, I think, all the years that you've worked at this. How on earth do you keep sane? I mean, I just couldn't have gone into a slaughterhouse. I'm just cringing here at the thought of it. And you did so many undercover investigations. How did you keep your heart intact?
Well, being able to rescue individual animals was a big part of being able to cope, especially in the early days. Because, as you say, we went into farms and stockyards and slaughterhouses to document conditions, and we would see horrible things, animals in crates and cages screaming to get out, animals dying, bleeding, injured, thrown in trash cans, thrown on piles of dead animals. And being able, so immersing oneself in that is very difficult. But being able to rescue individual animals out of that system and to watch them heal and to watch their lives transformed also helped to heal us. And so I try to dwell in that. And that's really what Farm Sanctuary is about. It's a place of healing in the midst of this horrible industry. And I dwell in that. And so that's how I've been able to continue doing this work. And today I do a lot of traveling and speaking, and I am inspired to meet so many people who are also interested in these issues and concerned about the way we are treating other animals and the way animal agriculture is destroying the planet and destroying our own health. And they're doing things to make a difference. And so that's what I dwell in now. And again, in the positive. I sort of think about the serenity prayer, to give me the strength to change the things I can, the serenity to accept the things I can't change, and the wisdom to know the difference. So if there's something horrible that I can't change, I'm not going to dwell on it. But if there's something positive happening, I'm going to dwell in it and be inspired by it.
That's, remarkable words of advice. I certainly couldn't do it. I can't even go to the animal shelter. When I donate something to them, I have to leave it outside in the parking lot and call them and say, it's out here. I don't have the strength of character, I guess, to do it, to be able to see the suffering. But so I admire the fact that you've been able to do that. There's so many people who just cannot. And I think that if more people did, then you think, oh, gosh, the whole country will change overnight. But this is going to take some time. Now, with the Farm Sanctuary, can you tell us a little bit about the Farm Sanctuary? How many animals do you have? Can people go see them?
Yes. Farm Sanctuary operates sanctuaries for rescued farm animals. We have one up in Watkins Glen, New York. We have one in Northern California and one in Acton, California, just outside of Los Angeles. And we'll be opening another one with John and Tracy Stewart in New Jersey in a year or so. But these are sanctuaries where the animals get to live out their lives. They're our friends, not our food. And people are encouraged to come visit and get to know these animals, to go hang out with the pigs and give them a belly rub, for example. And we also do events at the farm. And at our Watkins Glen Sanctuary, we have overnight accommodations where people can come and stay and wake up and look out and see the animals enjoying their lives. And, this is something that really is good for people, too, to be in an environment like that where it's so peaceful and the animals aren't afraid of us, and they don't have to be afraid of us, is a really calming, beautiful thing. And so people are encouraged to come visit the farm. We also do events. For example, every summer we have a hoedown where people can come and camp out on the farm. We have different speakers from around the country that give presentations. We have time when people can go hang out on the farm with the animals. We have vegan food throughout the event. And so these usually sell out, so people have to book fairly far in advance. Our overnight accommodations also sell out often, so it's good to plan ahead. But our website is farmsanctuary.org for anybody interested in visiting or supporting us. But we also do other events, like for Thanksgiving, for example. We started this program in 1986 to try to create a different kind of Thanksgiving, where instead of killing turkeys and having them in the middle of the dinner table, having their bodies sitting there, we wanted people to help save turkeys. So we started the Adopt a Turkey program, and now at our farms, every November, we have our celebrations for the turkeys, where the turkeys are the guests of honor. We feed them instead of eating them, and then we all enjoy a great vegan feast. So we turn the tables at Thanksgiving, and we invite people to come and be part of it. And it's beautiful to see these turkeys having an enjoyable meal, jumping on the table, digging into the squash and the pumpkin pie, and it's so cool. You have these kids that are just, really enjoying it, and we all do it. It sort of lifts our spirits, and it's a joyful event.
Turkeys crack me up. One makes a sound, they all do at the same time.
Yeah, they're social animals just like we are. You see somebody else do something, you're more likely to do it.
Remind me of great big walking party favors. They make that wonderful gobble. They do. They're just so delightful. They really are. They're just wonderful animals. And I think, one of the questions I also had is there's so many animals that have been manipulated through breeding or whatnot to age faster or to become bigger, so big they can't even walk. And that has to stop. I mean, is there a way to end it and then allow animals to go back to the way they were? How are you thinking that this can be dealt with?
Well, it's something that's going to take some time, and really the key part of it is consumers voting with our dollars and not purchasing animal foods, basically. Because when we do, we're enabling this industry to continue exploiting animals, to mass produce them, to factory farm them, and to genetically manipulate them in a way that you're describing. Where in the case of turkeys, for example, they grow very fast, very large. They sometimes die of heart attacks at just a few weeks old because they grow so fast and so large. And turkeys have been genetically manipulated to the point where they cannot even reproduce naturally anymore. So all the commercial turkeys that are being sold for Thanksgiving at these mainstream grocery stores are products of artificial insemination. So if people stopped eating them, then the industry would stop mass producing them and would start investing in other forms of food production. And there are some very exciting things happening now in the industry where you have big companies like Tyson Foods, which is responsible for enormous animal slaughter and exploitation. They're now starting to invest in plant-based businesses that are producing products that can replace meat. So I think that the business people are starting to realize that there's a movement here, that consumers are concerned about animal agriculture and they want alternatives. And I think the industry also realizes that animal agriculture is terribly inefficient. And ultimately, it's not sustainable, and things have to change. So I think change will happen, and ultimately what we need to do as well is create more habitat where we're not cutting down rainforest and destroying natural ecosystems to grow enormous quantities of corn and soybeans and other feed crops to feed farm animals. So as we start moving away from animal agriculture, it will require less land to produce plant foods for humans to consume, and that will allow us to leave natural places alone to grow, and then you create diversity in ecosystems, and then you have different animals that can live there. And so, in the case of farm animals, the only native farm animals in North America is the turkey. Instead of cattle running around the plains, we used to have bison. And maybe when we start creating more habitat, bison could be there again. And across Europe and Asia, parts of Africa, there were cattle. So maybe, we start creating more habitat there and letting the cattle, roam those areas. So We just need to, it's a holistic approach we need to take, but it starts with consumers changing the way we eat.
I didn't know that turkeys were the only natural animal from North America. I didn't know that. That's a...
They're the only native. The others have all been imported and, brought here to be fattened and used as a meat source.
I had no idea.
Yeah. Sad but true.
Absolutely fascinating. And then the wonderful thing, though, about what you're talking about, this holistic approach, is you're not just saying end this, stop this. You have to have something beyond that, where people can embrace the idea for change and that it's actually very good. There's something else to do. I think that's the best part of your message. My guest tonight, Jean Baur, founder of Factory Sanctuary, the Farm
Sanctuary.
Farm Sanctuary.
Yes, that's right.
New York. I keep looking at my articles here. Has joined us tonight to talk about his books and about the work that they're doing there. We're going to take a short break right now for station identification. Please stay with us.
Believe it or not, some companies still test shampoos and household products on animals. But 600 companies don't. For a free list showing which is which, contact People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. That's PETA, Norfolk, Virginia, 23510.
Hello, I'm Ian Anderson, and while I'm probably best known as the voice behind the band Jethro Tull, I also have a second big passion. I'm wild about cats. Big cats. Not surprisingly, one of my biggest hits was Bungle in the Jungle. I'm especially passionate about stopping the extinction of cats in the wild and have led fundraising efforts to protect many threatened species of wild cats. I'm also deeply concerned about how we treat cats in captivity. Big Cat Rescue has given over 100 abused and abandoned big cats a new home and new hope at their 45-acre sanctuary. And that's music to my ears. Visiting Big Cat Rescue and taking a guided tour of the facility is an exciting way to see these cats up close and learn about the issues they face. I have to tell you, the place rocks. They have lions, tigers, panthers, cougars, bobcats, and many more. To support this non-profit corporation and schedule a tour, visit them online at bigcatrescue.org.
I'm William Shatner, and this is Jimmy. Animals like Jimmy are often left behind by people fleeing hurricanes, fires, floods, and earthquakes. These abandoned animals cannot survive on their own. If you must evacuate your home, please never leave an animal behind. If you absolutely cannot take your animal with you, never leave him helplessly chained or caged. Many animals die because they cannot escape fires or rising waters. Animals need your help. Thank you.
Call PETA today, 757-622-PETA.
You are listening to the Dr. Briar Lee Mitchell Show on the Artist First Radio Network. All past shows are archived. You can find them at artistfirst.com. Now back to your host, Dr. Briar Lee Mitchell.
Thank you, Scott. For my listeners tonight, I'm so pleased that you've been able to tune in. I've got a wonderful guest this evening. Jean Baur has joined us to talk about Farm Sanctuary, that's in upstate New York and California, that he founded. And, Jean, I guess, one of the questions I also have for you is, whatever happened to Hilda, the sheep that you rescued?
Yeah, well, we found Hilda on a pile of dead animals behind a stockyard. We took her off the dead pile, and, she was covered in feces because she'd been laying there, and brought her to a veterinarian thinking she would probably have to be euthanized. But as he started examining her, she started perking up. She stood up within about a half hour, and she ended up living with us for more than 10 years. So Hilda had a good, long life, and we rescued her in 1986, and she died up at our farm in upstate New York in Watkins Glen, and we buried her there in a cemetery in the middle of the farm, so people can come visit and see where Hilda's buried.
Oh, I mean, I'm so glad that she had an amazing 10 years with you. And I'm sure you probably documented a lot of images and times with her because that was a very auspicious start for you, being able to rescue her. I'm just having a tough time wrapping my head around that level of violence and cruelty, but it happens every day. Every day it happens. And I don't know, this has got to be a tough way to make a decision. Do you show people the cruelty and violence, or do you show them Hilda later? Like before Hilda and after Hilda.
Yeah.
Which one do you think helps to encourage people the most?
Different people respond to different messages. I think sometimes people need to see the violence and the cruelty, and that opens their eyes, and they decide they don't want to be part of it. In other cases, it's too difficult for people to look at, and it closes them down, and they turn away. So different people respond to different things. The way I try to approach it is a little of both. And talking about Hilda being rescued and enjoying a good life, I think makes it easier to also talk about how she'd been left on a pile of dead animals, because ultimately there still is hope. And there's a happy ending to this story, and that makes the difficulty easier to deal with. So at Farm Sanctuary, we often tell before and after stories, and whenever possible, we try to also show pictures, although it's pretty tough in many cases to get a picture of somebody, inside of a factory farm system, because people that work there really don't like us coming in with cameras. So sometimes it's hard to get the pictures, but if you can show the before and after, it can be very impactful.
I guess that would have to come also from your years of experience reaching out to people, which one they're going to respond to most favorably. And I just, again, my hat's off to you for doing that. I couldn't do it. You've got some amazing books that are out there, Living the Farm Sanctuary Life, and also Farm Sanctuary, Changing Hearts and Minds About Animals and Food. Now, I see these are available on Amazon. Where else can people find your books?
People can get the books from Farm Sanctuary. We have gift shops at our sanctuaries, but getting them online is probably the easiest for most people. And the first book, Farm Sanctuary, Changing Hearts and Minds About Animals and Food, talks about beginning the sanctuary through our investigations, describes some of what we saw and what is happening in animal agriculture. So there's a pretty clear description of the realities and of the various harms caused by the industry in terms of water depletion, for example. But each chapter ends with a story of a rescued animal, so that provides hope in the midst of that reality. So that's a really good book for people who want to know about Farm Sanctuary, want to know about animal agriculture, and want to understand the issues. My second book is called Living the Farm Sanctuary Life, and that is more of a how-to book. It describes the issues. It talks about the environmental problems associated with animal agriculture, the health problems, and the animal cruelty problems, but does it in a more of an overview. And then it includes how to set up a vegan kitchen. It includes 100 recipes from amazing vegan chefs around the world. And it gives people tools for eating plants instead of animals. So it's more of a how-to book. The first book is more of a why we're doing this work and why it makes sense to make changes. The second book touches on that, but goes into the how-to of it.
Oh, wonderful. So you've got, both of these books are great companions for each other. I'm also seeing that they're available for Kobo, and you have them also for ebooks. So there's a lot of avenues that people can tap into to be able to read and, view the information that you've put together here. When you started with this, what prompted you to go in this direction with your life?
I grew up in the Hollywood Hills in California near Griffith Park. And so I saw wild animals, skunks and raccoons and coyotes and deer. And I also saw the harm that human beings were causing to other animals and to nature. I remember, for example, a deer who was stuck in a chain link fence in a neighbor's backyard. And that deer had to be killed, and it just bothered me. I remember another neighbor who was making their house bigger, and they were putting up this wall. And they ended up cutting down this beautiful old oak tree to make the house bigger. And it just viscerally upset me. So I saw human harm to nature and animals. And I ultimately didn't want to be part of that, and didn't want to be part of the violence that I saw around me. Didn't want to be a cog in a wheel of a system that was causing so much harm. So in high school and college, I started getting involved with nonprofit groups, started getting involved with human rights organizations, environmental rights organizations, and then ultimately animal rights organizations. And when I learned about factory farming and how it was terrible for the planet, terrible for animals, terrible for people, and how it was unknown and most people weren't even thinking about it, I felt it was a very important issue. So in 1985, I went vegan. I felt if I can live well without causing unnecessary harm, why wouldn't I? So I went vegan. And that was basically when I learned that it was possible to get everything I needed from plants and without any animal products, because I had grown up, and I think most people still grow up, believing that they need to eat animal foods for nutrition, which is completely untrue. We can get everything we need from plants. So once I learned that I could be a vegan, I went vegan in 1985, co-founded Farm Sanctuary in 1986, and felt that it was important to see firsthand what was happening. So I started going into farms and stockyards and slaughterhouses to document conditions, and then we would find living animals left for dead. And then we started taking them away from those abusive places and creating the sanctuary. And it's been a long process, and it's continued to grow. There are now sanctuaries around the world doing similar work. There's a farm sanctuary movement, in fact. And it's an exciting time because in addition to the work we do, there's just a lot more awareness generally. And there are businesses now starting to create plant-based alternatives to animal foods. And it's never been easier to be vegan. So I feel that we've come a long way, and there's some really exciting things starting to happen.
I would agree with that. I mean, I've lived this lifestyle for about, 15, 16 years now. And when I started, there was like the little salad you get at a restaurant. You basically had to go to a restaurant and bring your own food. And in stores, it was so hard to find anything. And now, like I said, I was just amazed to see a commercial on television yesterday that actually used the word vegan. I think that's remarkable, and I think it's a testament for the work that you are doing and other people who are advocates for not only, cruelty-free, but, teaching people that you can live this way. And you've lived this way for a long time, and I'm looking at photographs that were sent to me, and you look pretty healthy.
No, well, thanks. I'm doing okay. I just turned 55, and, earlier this year I did my first ultra marathon, which is running, farther than a marathon. In the last 5 or so years, I've done 6 marathons. I've done about a dozen triathlons, including an Ironman, which is where you swim 2.4 miles, bike 112 miles, and then run a marathon. So I've done all of this, of course, eating only plants. And there are elite athletes today who are, performing at a very high level on plant foods. So this idea that you can't get the nutrients you need is just completely incorrect. And in fact, the only U.S. male weightlifter to qualify for the Olympics in Rio de Janeiro in 2016 was a vegan. So, and then you have ultra runners like Scott Jurek, who won the Western States 100-mile race 7 times in a row, won Badwater, it's a 135-mile race, starts in the desert and runs up a mountain in the summer, 135 miles. He also won the Spartathlon, which is like a 150-something mile race. All of that on plant foods. He's a vegan as well. So there are elite athletes performing at the highest levels, including NFL players, as vegans. So it's you can get everything you need. And I'm not an elite athlete by any stretch, but just doing those things demonstrates that this kind of nutrition works for elite athletes as well as for regular people.
Well, yes. I mean, and the fact also that you go and you talk about this and you are very clearly vegan as you're running these marathons, I can't even run to my mailbox. So I think that's wonderful. I remember that story about the weightlifter. I believe it's Kendrick Ferris is the one you were talking about.
That's right, yes.
He didn't he didn't say it in such a way like, here, you stupid people, look at me, I'm amazing. He would just state that, no, I'm a vegan, and very quietly talk about it. And yes, he was the only one to qualify, and I just think that's absolutely marvelous. I have 5 dogs, and my dogs are vegan as well. So it's really encouraging for me to see also that foods are being developed for our pets. And there's now a movement that Beyond Beef, I think it's called, or there's some products that are coming out that mimic beef, even down to looking like it's seeping blood, which, but what are your thoughts about these mimicry kind of foods? What do you think about that?
Well, I think people have grown or are familiar with eating meat, and having substitutes that taste a lot like meat and the experience is similar will make it easier for people to start transitioning away from eating animal products towards eating more plant foods. And I think the company you're referring to is called Beyond Meat. And I love their philosophy. Basically, to produce animal foods, you need lots and lots of resources. You need to grow tons and tons of feed crops to feed animals. You need something like 10 times more land and water and other resources to grow feed crops to feed farm animals. If human beings grew the crops and ate them directly, we could feed far more people with far fewer resources. So what Beyond Meat is doing is they are taking plant proteins and putting them into veggie burgers or other meatless meat-type products that taste a lot like meat, that have the same texture, that have the same mouthfeel. And as you were referring to, they have like burgers that will sizzle on the grill. They look a lot like a regular hamburger, but they're made entirely out of plant proteins and other plant products. So I think those are a great way for people to realize that being vegan doesn't mean giving up eating a hamburger, because it tastes a lot like a hamburger, or a veggie hot dog, or other kinds of foods that people are familiar with. There are veggie meatballs you can have. So you can still have spaghetti and meatballs, but, meatballs made out of plant proteins and eat vegan. So I think these products and these companies are demonstrating that plant foods are very they're becoming increasingly accessible because of companies like that, and I think it's a very good thing.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that. I really wasn't quite sure when I first saw the products coming out, and thinking, well, maybe this is, going to be a contradictory type of thing. But if people are starting to enjoy it, enjoy the product and use it more, well, that's more animals that are saved. There are critics who do say, though, that there's so much industry around the farming of animals that the further we get away from doing that, what's going to happen to all the people whose livelihoods depend on this?
Well, the food business is constantly changing, and I think actually small farms, more diversified farms, more community-oriented agriculture would create more jobs than the factory system. And, with the factory system, it's very capital-intensive. You have a lot of machinery doing a fair bit of the work, and the jobs that people have in those operations are oftentimes very harmful, and you have high injury rates, and sometimes you can't find people to do that work, so you have a huge problem with bringing in low-paid workers who are not treated very well, oftentimes from other countries. So that's what happens in the factory farming system. So when you talk about jobs and creating a livelihood for people, I think we want to create good jobs that don't injure people, like repetitive motion problems people have in slaughterhouses, for example. Mm-hmm. And I think smaller farms, more diversified. So I can envision like a whole different kind of food system where you have urban farming, and that is actually growing significantly. You have rooftop gardens. There's a veganic certified indoor farm in Philadelphia, and the guy who runs it talks about green-collar jobs. So he took over a warehouse downtown Philly that was basically abandoned, and he's now growing greens there. And in like 36 square feet, he can grow as many greens as it would take an acre of land to grow outdoors. So it's very efficient, very productive. You're creating jobs for people in the community where they need good, healthy food, and it's grown right there in the community, so it's accessible and affordable. So I think think that's the kind of agriculture that generates jobs, produces healthy food, and does it in an efficient way that doesn't deplete resources, and then it's food that doesn't make us sick, and it's also a system that doesn't harm animals. So it's a win-win-win across the board. So there are some very exciting things happening now towards creating a new plant-based food system that I think is going to be, it's very exciting when I think about the things happening like that.
Well, there are industries that are starting to take up the standard, take the challenge, and, try to find ways to do this that, as you said, help whole communities out. And it's a little tough right now with the current administration claiming there isn't any climate change. Oh. And I live in Florida. I got to tell you, yeah, there's a climate change going on. But animals being raised on these farms, especially the ones that eat grass, they're one of the biggest contributors to this kind of pollution, and eventually they will go away. Now, the factories that, the farms, that produce the plants, does it, some critics will say that it takes so much more space to grow all this food for a nation, but you are explaining that no. Animals take up so much more space.
Exactly. It's inherently much more efficient to grow plants and eat those directly instead of to grow plants and harvest the plants and then feed them to animals. So just from an energy standpoint, it's much more sensible to eat plants instead of animals. There's a New York Times article a few years ago called Rethinking the Meat Guzzler. And in it, the author compared the amount of fossil fuels needed for a meat meal versus a vegetarian meal. It took 16 times more fossil fuels for the meat meal. And this is in terms of petrochemical fertilizers that are used on feed crops. It's the harvesting, it's the planting, it's all the energy that goes into bringing that crop in and then storing that crop and then feeding it to animals, plus all the energy to raise the animals and give the animals water. And then at the slaughterhouse, these tons and tons of energy there too, and water and other resources. So it's very inefficient. And the most efficient thing is to actually have food grow right in your front lawn. And there's a food not lawns movement happening as well, where people are tearing up their lawns instead of, mowing grass. They're actually growing vegetables. And I could envision, businesses where you have gardeners now that are taking care of people's houses and their lawns that actually become gardeners instead of lawnmowers. And they actually grow vegetables, and every week people who have houses have a box of vegetables. And then the gardener, in addition to doing the work and providing that box of vegetables for the homeowner, could also sell additional boxes of vegetables to people at the farmer's market or through a community-supported agriculture program. So I think with innovative approaches, there's lots of opportunities for people to create jobs, to create businesses, to create healthy, inspiring livelihoods.
Well, I see there's more companies, and in fact, you mentioned one, Tyson, that I just think is one of the more brutal ones out there when it comes to how they treat poultry. But they're also now starting to embrace vegan foods. And are you interacting with them directly? Do you speak to them, these various companies that produce the meat items, to give them ideas or to help them go in a different direction? I just sort of feel like it's kind of creepy that a company that treats birds the way they do, and then they say, okay, and here's our vegan vegan house, so we will speak to anybody who is open to listening, even if somebody is doing something that we think is horrible. In fact, people who are doing something we think is horrible are really good people for us to talk with, because if we can convince them to stop doing that and to start doing something positive, that could have a significant impact on other animals and on the earth. And, at the end of the day, our goal is not to put anybody down. Our goal is to create a food system that is healthy, sustainable, where food is accessible to everybody who needs it. It is nourishing instead of making us sick, that it could be a good business and a good livelihood for people. But it doesn't have to have animals being exploited and killed. So if we can get huge businesses to move away from an animal killing model to a plant production model, it's significant. So, but
I also am a big fan of grassroots, community-oriented farming. And in fact, in my view, that's the ideal. And but I support any shift in a direction towards a more compassionate plant-based food system and away from animal exploitation and an extractive industry, which is what farming currently is. So we need to move more towards a holistic, community-oriented approach, I think. And but eat growing plants instead of animals is really one of the key parts of that.
I'm wondering if there's any legislation that can be introduced, some public funds to help some of these smaller communities, in the middle of the city to produce a farm. I know there are some places, Chicago, for example, and I think in New York, where people can, as a neighborhood, build a farm, not a farm, but, an area where they can grow their own vegetables. And they each get a section of it and go in and work at looking after the crops there. I mean, are you aware of any legislation that is out there now where people can get money to help set up their little personal or community patches to grow food?
Yeah, there's not nearly enough support for that, but there is starting to be some investment in that direction. And in fact, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which has historically been very sympathetic to factory farms, is now starting to do a little bit more to promote organic agriculture. And that started during the last administration especially. So far it has not been killed in the new administration. And it's a relatively small program, so hopefully it will continue to go along and in fact grow because the market is demanding more organic produce. And so it's one of the fastest growing sectors of agriculture, in fact. So and part of that happens in urban areas with rooftop gardens, with indoor vertical farms, with community gardens. And I think that's what you were referring to, where people, have a plot that they actually farm in their city. And this is a very vibrant thing that is happening. I go to New York City, and friends of mine are in Brooklyn, and there's a community garden right down the street. I live here near Washington, D.C., and in my neighborhood there's a community garden. So this is starting to happen in communities all over the country, urban and suburban. And then in rural areas, people are have their own gardens as well. And but there's not the kind of support there should be from government sources and government agencies, but hopefully that will start changing.
Well, do you have any plans at this time to work on another book?
I'm starting to think about a next book, but don't have anything concrete yet. I'm still traveling and speaking with my second book, Living the Farm Sanctuary Life. So that has been my primary, the primary book I'm talking about now. But I could see another one, and still need to figure out exactly what kind of message I want to put out there next. So
I'm hoping that you do. I've read through most of the Farm Sanctuary book, Changing Hearts and Minds, and it just reinforces a lot of these things that you have been talking about. But your approach to talking about it and writing about it is it's very very civilized. It isn't this passionate, I'm going to beat you over the head unless you stop doing this. And I think that's wonderful that you are such a spokesperson and you do it so calmly. I can't, because I just, oh my God, don't do that. And so it's really, I really admire the fact that you're able to do this in such a world where people just regularly treat animals like they are something just to be discarded. And so I think that's wonderful, and I hope that you continue to do that. Now, what can individuals do as far as if they can't go to the Farm Sanctuary? How can they follow what you're doing there? How can they help what's going on there?
Well, I have a public Facebook page for Gene Baur, and then also there's a public Facebook page for Farm Sanctuary. So you can follow us there, and also on Twitter and Instagram. People can go to the farmsanctuary.org website to learn more about what they can do with Farm Sanctuary. And then also, ultimately, each of us in our own communities with our daily food choices can make a huge difference. There are many things in this world that are outside of our control. But when it comes to what we eat, each of us every day makes choices, and those have profound impact on our own health as well as other animals and the planet. So just being mindful about the way we eat and starting to shift towards eating more plant foods and fewer animal foods is a very good step for most people.
I have so enjoyed having you on the show tonight, and especially learning about turkeys.
Yeah, and, the turkeys, by the way, I want to say are very friendly. We have turkeys at our farm that will follow you around like puppy dogs. So they're wonderful animals, and unfortunately, very much maligned because we mistreat them. So then I think psychologically we then don't want to see them as worthy of our consideration. So we start denigrating them. But turkeys are amazing.
Well, yeah, they look a little foreign. I guess that they're descendants of the dinosaurs and have that sort of lizardy look about their heads, but they really are adorable little animals. But it just cracks me up that they're the only native species to this part of the world.
Yeah.
Own up to that. I think Benjamin Franklin was right. They should have possibly been our national bird instead of the eagle. But maybe the eagles and the turkeys can just have a good party together and keep things going.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. My guest tonight has been Jean Baur, one of the co-founders of the Farm Sanctuary and author of several good books about the subject. Thank you so much for coming on my show.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it. You have a wonderful day.
You too. And for my listeners out there, as always, please remember, be kind to each other, but especially be kind to the animals.